For 48 years, the official record said Stella Walsh was simply the fastest woman alive. 3 Olympics, 41 world records, a name etched into track history. That's the story they tell. It isn't what happened. The people who keep the record books made sure you'd never learn what her own body would say about her once she could no longer speak for herself. It's 1932. Los Angeles. A Polish-American sprinter named Stanisława Walasiewicz, running as Stella Walsh, blows past the field in the 100 meters. Gold medal, world record. She does it again in 1936, this time silver, beaten by a fraction of a second. For the next 4 decades, she's untouchable in the record books. Coaches study her stride. Rivals call her unbeatable. Nobody questions the name on the medal. Nobody is supposed to. Here's the first crack. In December 1980, Stella Walsh is shot and killed during a robbery in Cleveland. She's 69 years old, an innocent bystander, nothing to do with the crime itself. Routine procedure says the coroner performs an autopsy, and that's where the official story stops matching the body on the table. The Cuyahoga County coroner finds something that doesn't fit the name in the record books, doesn't fit 4 decades of women's track history, doesn't fit anything anyone had prepared for. Reporters get a one-line confirmation, then silence. The full findings barely surface. A woman who outran the world for a generation dies, and the first real question about who she was only gets asked after it's too late for her to answer it. You'd think that's the end of it. A tragic footnote, a strange coincidence, nothing more. But the timing doesn't hold up. Just 12 years before her death, in 1968, the International Olympic Committee had quietly rolled out mandatory chromosome testing for every female competitor. Every athlete, every sport, no exceptions. A system built specifically to catch exactly the kind of case sitting on that coroner's table in Cleveland. Walsh had competed and dominated decades before that system existed. She never had to pass a test that was, in effect, built for someone like her. And once the test existed, nobody went back and asked whether the record books needed rewriting. Here's what they actually buried. The autopsy found that Stella Walsh had ambiguous genitalia and a rare chromosomal pattern, a mix of male and female cell lines, a condition doctors call mosaicism. By the standards the IOC itself had written into law 12 years earlier, this was precisely the profile sex verification testing existed to flag. But those standards didn't exist retroactively. Her medals were untouchable. Her records were final. And the officials who ran track and field in 1980 had a choice. Reopen 4 decades of results, strip a dead woman of her legacy, and admit their sport had spent 50 years unprepared for a question it was about to make mandatory or say nothing, and let the record stand exactly as written. They chose silence. Not because the finding was uncertain, because certainty would have cost too much. An asterisk next to Stella Walsh's name would have meant an asterisk next to the entire era, every rival she'd beaten, every record built on the assumption that the sport already knew how to tell who was allowed to compete. Easier to let one coroner's report gather dust in a county archive than to admit the foundation underneath 30 years of women's track was never as solid as the record books pretended. So the record never changed. Stella Walsh is still listed as the 1932 Olympic champion, still credited with 41 world records, still a name in the history of women's track with no footnote attached. Meanwhile, the very testing system her case seemed to justify went on to punish other women for decades. Women whose bodies didn't fit a binary the sport had drawn without ever fully understanding it, using a case it never publicly acknowledged as its own origin story. The athletes who came after her were tested against a standard shaped by a body nobody was allowed to talk about. She paid for a system that was, in part, built because of her, and she never got a say in it, because by the time anyone looked closely, she'd already been buried twice. So here's the question nobody in an official capacity has ever answered on the record. If the coroner's findings were real enough to shape international testing policy, why were they never real enough to open her file? And if track and field is still quietly deciding, case by case, whose body counts as a woman's, what does that say about the ones we haven't found out about yet?